sustainable resources, and really my biggest sort of attribute is I'm a good community connector and community builder. So I think you'll see that thread through some of the different work that I've done in different communities. When I was little, I was fortunate to grow up in an area of town, a small town in North Dakota, and we had a river on two sides of us. And my dad and I would often garden together. And I remember laying down at the end of one day in the grass and just looking up to the sky and telling my dad, "We are so lucky." I had an innate sense at that time that we were lucky to be able to just have so much green around us and enjoy that. So I had an interest in science and went to Drake University originally to study sciences, but quickly it did not feel like a good fit for me. I think my examples were a lot of just laboratory work and not enough people connection. So I looked at being a science teacher, and then that didn't feel right either. So I was fortunate enough to do an individualized major. I essentially made up my own degree in environmental education, much like what Molly does, as looking at being kind of a naturalist. But I wasn't interested in kind of going off into county parks. I wanted to be in an urban environment and really have the work that I do better the community in an urban space. So I developed my own job description and worked for the City of Des Moines Parks Department as a community garden coordinator, essentially helping people in urban spaces grow food for themselves. It was my version of environmental education. That brought me in the Parks Department. They saw that I was doing organic gardening classes and realized they had someone with a conservation bent. So I became a champion within the Parks Department for sustainable park management. So I looked at policies and procedures and how we manage our park system. So this is at Grays Lake Park, one of our park projects that we put in native plants. I also started the prescribed burn program for the Des Moines Parks Department, so we were burning in urban environments, which was pretty radical at the time. It's not so much now, but it is me as well. And that, I was in a division of mostly men who were doing landscape management for our park system. They were used to mowing, and I was telling them, let's not mow anymore, and let's start burning our parks. And I think much of what you've heard from some other speakers is a lot of my work is fairly interdisciplinary. So this is, if anyone ever saw it, this was around Grays Lake for about a year. We worked with some college students at Drake to kind of look at who was living at Grays Lake Park. And then we did stencils on the trail of those species that were there. So it was trying to integrate some environmental awareness to those that are just looping the lake all the time. We also did bluebird boxes in our parks, and we have, most of them were used as well. And again, that was a connection of kind of bringing ecology and some Drake University colleges to doing those projects in our park system. Another picture for Grays Lake, a guy who was very excited about what he was catching out of the lake. Most people visit the Grays Lake Park, which I managed for a while, and don't even think about what's living in the lake. So we're trying to look at kind of natural lakeshore restoration in ways that we can actually increase the sort of aquatic species that were living there. And we also wanted to provide good habitat, provide a way of people understanding and educating. So we did some fun programming for youth. That this was the sort of, I think it's a Japanese style of essentially, to mark how big your catch was so that they would do prints of it. I've now moved on from the local city level to doing regional planning work. This is a fancy map of some areas in the Des Moines region where I was able to work with biologists and ecologists mapping places like wetlands and key bird areas, floodplains, and then working with city planners to say, let's avoid planting in these areas, let's avoid putting roadways in those areas. I also do a lot of transportation planning, which does not sound fun or interesting, but there's a lot that happens from a sustainability perspective in how we move around our city. So the more that we can bike and walk and use transit, the less impact we're going to have on our environment. So I kind of look from a systems level across the community and how we can support some of those changes. One specific way we're trying to do that, I recently completed a study on electric vehicle charging stations. It's not something we hear a lot about in our community, but it's a growing movement that's, I know Kansas City's putting in 1,000 charging stations within the next year. So we're trying to do that and then inspire that with city planners in the Des Moines area as well, in the metro area. And then also I'm starting to work with watersheds. So this is a picture of the Walnut Creek watershed. There's a lot of work happening from city planners and elected officials trying to get together and say we understand that water passes across jurisdictions and we all need to work together to improve water quality, as well as figure out how we can recreate in those spaces. So I'm also helping do some regional planning work on our water trails, so along our rivers, to say how can we get people out there connected to these waterways and having really fun experiences, bird watching or canoeing. A couple of just thoughts on my very last few slides. I'm often still one of the only female in meetings working with city planners and elected officials, and it can be very challenging. I think our values are different, how we think is different, and how we interact. I can just tell that men just talk differently to men as they do to me. So it feels frustrating, but also it's a huge opportunity because we do think differently. We have different values. We hear that today, that a lot of the women, because they got into their work because of wanting to make a difference in the world and just valuing relationships over things that are right and wrong. And so I think we have to be there and see both sides. That's some of the ways that are challenging. And some unsolicited advice. I just turned 40, so I feel like I'm starting to really learn a lot and really just get confident in my space in the world that what you have, even if you're the only one thinking that way, is of value. And so just trust that. And also know that I think a lot of women tend not to speak up. Sorry, I'm using a couple extra slides. We tend to want to be completely 100% confident in what we're saying before we say anything, and men are not that way usually. So just trust yourself and trust what you know and make sure that your